Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here we are. I recently did something I never imagined I'd do. I went undercover in my own company. And what I discovered completely changed how I see my business. I run a mid-sized retail chain with about 50 stores nationwide. We sell a little bit of everything: clothing, home goods, electronics, the usual. On paper, things were fine. Profits were stable, customer satisfaction scores were decent, and my executive team assured me we were doing great. But I kept hearing murmurs: employees struggling to hit impossible sales targets, customer complaints about service quality, and an increasing turnover rate that HR brushed off as normal. So, I decided to see for myself. I shaved my beard, ditched the tailored suits, and became Mark, a seasonal sales associate at one of our busiest locations. I even went through the full onboarding process, sitting through orientation videos and signing the same paperwork every new hire does. No one, not the store manager, not the employees, knew who I really was. From day one, I was in for a rude awakening. I expected to spend most of my time helping customers. You know, the whole customer-first philosophy we preached at every executive meeting? Yeah, turns out that's not how things actually worked. My first shift, I was immediately thrown into restocking shelves, processing returns, and handling online orders. Customers? They were almost an afterthought. If someone needed help, we tried to assist, but only if we weren't too busy. I thought maybe this was just a rough first day. It wasn't. My manager, Lisa, was nice enough but stressed beyond belief. "We don't have time for small talk," she told me when I lingered too long with a customer looking for a specific pair of shoes. "Just point them in the right direction and get back to your task." That hit me hard. Weren't we supposed to be a customer-focused business? Then there were the sales quotas. Oh, the quotas. Every associate was expected to upsell like their life depended on it. Credit cards, warranties, premium memberships, you name it. I had always assumed our sales goals were aggressive but reasonable. Turns out, they were just aggressive. Employees were practically begging customers to sign up for things they didn't need, not because they believed in the products, but because their hours depended on it. And that's when I realized something else. Morale was in the gutter. By my third shift, I overheard two employees whispering near the break room. "I can't do this anymore," one of them said. "If I don't hit my numbers this week, my shifts get cut again." I felt a knot in my stomach. I set those numbers. I approved those policies. And now I was seeing firsthand what they were doing to my employees. But the real wake-up call came when I met Jamie. Jamie had been working there for 2 years and was one of the best employees on the floor, knowledgeable, friendly, always on top of things. But when I asked her if she liked working here, she just shrugged. "I used to," she admitted. "Before they cared more about numbers than people." That stuck with me. I had gone undercover to learn about customer expectations, but what I was really uncovering was a workplace that was slowly grinding my employees down. And I had no one to blame but myself. I knew I had to do something. But first, I had to see just how deep the problem went. After a week of working undercover, I had seen enough to confirm my worst fears. My company was failing its employees. But the real question was, how did this happen? How did I, someone who prided myself on building a people-first company, end up running a business where my own workers felt like disposable sales machines? I decided to dig deeper. During breaks, I started asking my coworkers casual questions, trying not to raise suspicion. "What's the toughest part of the job?" I'd ask. "The quotas," they'd say almost every time. One guy, Matt, had been working at the store for 6 months. "I actually like helping customers," he admitted one afternoon. "But if I spend too much time making sure someone finds the right product instead of pushing them to sign up for a credit card, my numbers drop. And if my numbers drop, my hours get cut. It's like they don't even care about good service. They just want us to sell, sell, sell." That was the moment I realized something horrifying. My employees were being punished for actually helping customers. It wasn't just about low morale. The policies we had in place, policies I approved, were actively discouraging the kind of service I wanted my company to be known for. I also noticed something about our customers. While corporate reports showed that customer complaints were within an acceptable range, what I saw on the floor told a different story. Customers were frustrated. They wanted help but couldn't get it because employees were stretched too thin. They wanted recommendations, but associates were too busy processing returns or moving stock. They hated being pressured to sign up for store credit cards, but that's what we trained our staff to do. One afternoon, a woman came in looking for a specific type of vacuum. She was clearly overwhelmed by the options. I spent a few minutes walking her through the differences, answering her questions, and making sure she felt confident in her purchase. When she finally decided, she smiled and said, "Thank you. You're the first person in a long time who actually helped me without trying to sell me something extra." That was it. That was the moment I knew something had to change. I spent another few days gathering information. I memorized the daily routines, the problem areas, the things employees really spent their time on. I took notes on the pressure tactics managers were using, the unspoken rules of the floor, and the small ways employees were trying to push back against an unmanageable system. And then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat down in the break room and just listened. Jamie, the seasoned employee, was venting to a coworker about the latest sales quota push. "I'm sick of feeling like I have to trick people into signing up for a credit card just to keep my hours. I didn't take this job to be a scam artist." Matt nodded. "And the worst part? Half the people who sign up don't even qualify, so they get denied at checkout and blame us." I felt like a brick had been dropped on my chest. I wanted to tell them that it wasn't supposed to be like this. That I never intended for things to get this bad. But what good would that do? My intentions didn't change the fact that these people were struggling under policies I created. By the time my undercover shift ended, I knew what had to happen next. It was time to blow my cover. I just wasn't sure how they were going to react. The moment had come. After 2 weeks of working as Mark, I had gathered everything I needed. I understood the pressure my employees were under. I saw how frustrated our customers were. I knew exactly where we were failing as a company. And now, it was time to do something about it. But first, I had to reveal who I really was. The store had just wrapped up a chaotic weekend shift. The break room was filled with exhausted employees, most of them scrolling on their phones or silently sipping coffee before heading home. I waited until the room had quieted down, then stood up. "Hey guys," I said, my voice steady. "I need to tell you something." Jamie, Matt, and a few others looked up, mildly interested. I took a deep breath. "My name isn't Mark. My name is, insert CEO name, and I'm the CEO of this company." Dead silence. A few employees blinked at me. One guy actually laughed, assuming I was joking. But then Jamie, who had worked here for years, stared at me, really looked at me, and her face turned pale. "No way," she whispered. I nodded. "Yeah way." I braced myself for their reaction, expecting anger. And I got it. "You mean to tell me," Matt said slowly, standing up, "that we've been complaining about this job to you this whole time? And you just, what? Pretended to be one of us." There it was. The betrayal. "I get it," I said, holding up my hands. "I should have told you sooner. But I needed to see things for myself. And now that I have, I can promise you this. Things are going to change." Silence. Jamie crossed her arms. "Yeah? How? You gonna take away our sales quotas? Or are we still supposed to pressure people into buying stuff they don't need just so we can keep our jobs?" A few people murmured in agreement. I had spent weeks hearing their frustrations, and now they were finally aiming them directly at me. Good. I let out a slow breath and nodded. Yes. That's exactly what I'm going to do. They went quiet again. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the same one I had been using to take notes during my shifts. I've been watching, listening, and learning. And what I saw is unacceptable. So starting today, we're making changes. They were still skeptical, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. They had heard promises before. So I made my first move. I turned to Jamie. "First off, sales quotas? They're gone." A few people gasped. Matt's eyebrows shot up. I nodded. No more credit card sign-up pressure. No more forcing customers into memberships they don't want. If we're going to be a customer-first company, then we need to actually put customers first, not just their wallets. The room was dead silent. I could see the gears turning in their heads, wondering if this was real. I turned to Matt. "We're also changing the way we schedule shifts. No more cutting hours just because someone didn't sell enough protection plans. Your schedule should be based on performance and availability, not a numbers game. A few employees exchanged glances. This was real. I kept going. I'm also bringing in more staff. You guys are stretched way too thin. No wonder customers are frustrated. You can't help them if you're drowning in other tasks. Jamie let out a breath and rubbed her temples. I can't believe this. Believe it, I said. Because this is just the beginning. The mood in the room was shifting. The anger and disbelief were still there, but now there was something else, hope. And then, Matt asked the question I knew was coming. That all sounds great, he said cautiously, but what about the managers? He gestured toward the door. Some of them aren't exactly the supportive type. I had been waiting for that. I nodded. Yeah. I noticed. And that's when I dropped the real bombshell. Tomorrow morning, I'm bringing in every store manager for a meeting. And they're going to hear exactly what I heard from you. A few jaws dropped. And if they don't get on board with these changes? Jamie asked. I met her gaze. Then they won't be working here anymore. Matt let out a low whistle. Damn. For the first time since I had revealed myself, I saw something new in their expressions, belief. This wasn't just some corporate stunt. This wasn't just lip service. I was about to shake this company to its core. The meeting room felt heavier than usual. My store managers sat around the table, expecting another routine check-in, some of them distracted, others clearly just going through the motions. That changed the second I spoke. I've been working undercover in our stores. The air in the room shifted. Some managers stiffened. A few glanced at each other, unsure if they had heard me correctly. Lisa, the store manager I had worked under, suddenly looked very interested in the notepad in front of her, avoiding my gaze. I let the silence stretch for a moment before I continued. For the past 2 weeks, I've been on the floor as a sales associate. I stocked shelves. I ran registers. I dealt with customers. And I saw exactly how our policies are affecting our people. The room was dead quiet now. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. I watched employees struggle to meet impossible sales quotas, afraid that if they didn't, their hours would be cut. I saw customers leave frustrated because there weren't enough staff available to help them. I saw managers pushing numbers over service, forcing employees to focus on credit card sign-ups instead of real customer needs. And I saw some of you, I let my eyes sweep across the table, enforce those policies without a second thought. Lisa shifted uncomfortably. Paul, one of the more old-school managers, crossed his arms and leaned back. With all due respect, he said, his tone carefully measured, sales quotas exist for a reason. We're running a business. If we don't push sales, how do we stay competitive? I expected this. Paul, I said, leaning forward, do you think customers enjoy being pressured into things they don't want? He hesitated. Well, no, but. Do you think employees do their best work when they're exhausted, worried about making rent because they missed a quota? No answer. I sat back. I saw something interesting while I was undercover. The employees who genuinely tried to help customers, the ones who took the time to answer questions, to make sure people got what they actually needed, were often the same ones who were struggling to hit their numbers. And do you know why? No one spoke. Because we've built a system that punishes good service. We've made it harder for employees to do their jobs well because we've been measuring success by the wrong standards. That ends today. Lisa finally looked up. So what's the plan? I glanced around the room, taking in their reactions. Some were still skeptical, others just waiting to see where this was going. But there was something else in their expressions now, something I hadn't seen before. Uncertainty. The realization that change was coming, whether they liked it or not. And it was. The room was still tense, but now, the silence carried something different. Uncertainty, maybe even curiosity. The managers were waiting to hear just how deep these changes would go. I took a steady breath. Effective immediately, we're shifting our priorities. Sales quotas are gone. No more pushing employees to pressure customers into credit cards or memberships. If they offer, fine. But if a customer says no, that's the end of the conversation. A murmur rippled through the room. Some looked relieved. Others, like Paul, clearly weren't convinced. If we take away quotas, he said, choosing his words carefully, what's keeping employees motivated? We still need to drive sales. I nodded. We do. But I'd rather have sales come from genuine customer interactions than from people being cornered at the checkout. Lisa, still quiet until now, leaned forward. So what are we focusing on? Service, I said. Real service. Helping customers. Making them want to come back. The more trust we build, the better our numbers will be. And while we're at it, we're going to fix scheduling too. No more punishing employees by cutting their hours. Schedules will be based on availability and performance, not some arbitrary metric. That got a reaction. A few of the managers exchanged glances. Some looked relieved, like they had been waiting for permission to make these changes. Others were still on the fence. Paul let out a slow exhale, shaking his head. Look, I get the idea. But that's not how retail works. You know that. Sales goals exist for a reason. I met his gaze. You're right. And I'm not saying we stop measuring success. But success isn't just about pushing the most product. It's about creating an experience that makes people want to shop with us again. And right now, we're failing at that. Lisa nodded slowly. So what happens next? Now came the part they weren't expecting. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with our district leads to roll this out. Store managers will have 2 weeks to adjust. Some of you will embrace it. Others won't. I let that hang in the air for a moment before continuing. If you can't support these changes, I need you to be honest with me. Because I only want leaders in this company who believe in where we're going. The tension in the room thickened. A few managers shifted in their seats. Some were already nodding, but others, like Paul, looked uneasy. This was the line in the sand. For years, our stores had operated under the same system, one that had slowly drained both employees and customers. And now, I was asking them to unlearn it. Not everyone would be willing to. I stood up. Think about it. If you're in, great. If you're not, we'll have a conversation. Either way, change is happening. With that, I walked out of the room, leaving them with the weight of what was coming. Not everyone was on board. By the time I met with the district leads the next morning, the pushback had already started. Word had spread fast, and some managers weren't happy. A few of them sent emails voicing their concerns, but others were more direct. Paul was the first to request a private meeting. He walked into my office looking tense, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I've been thinking about what you said, he started, his tone careful. And I'm not sure I can get behind it. I nodded, letting him talk. I get that you want to improve morale. And sure, maybe the pressure's been a little much. But this is retail. People work hard or they don't last. If we take away quotas, how do we keep employees accountable? I had expected this argument. We're not taking away accountability, I said. We're just shifting the focus. Instead of pressuring employees into selling things customers don't want, we'll measure performance based on service, teamwork, and efficiency. Paul let out a short laugh. That sounds nice, but let's be real. Corporate still cares about numbers. I am corporate, I reminded him. And I care about results. But results don't just come from squeezing every last sale out of someone. They come from running stores where people actually want to work. You don't get loyalty from customers or employees by making everything transactional. He was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening. And if I don't agree? I met his gaze. Then maybe this isn't the right place for you anymore. That was it. No threats. No hostility. Just the simple truth. Paul stared at me, waiting for me to soften my stance, to give him some room to push back. When I didn't, he sighed and sat back. Fine, he muttered. I'll give it a shot. It wasn't exactly enthusiasm, but it was a start. Not everyone took it as well. By the end of the week, 3 managers had handed in their resignations, unwilling to adjust. A few others were clearly struggling with the changes, but sticking it out to see where things went. The ones who embraced it, though, they were already seeing a shift. At one of our pilot locations, a store manager named Jen reached out with something surprising. Customers are actually thanking us, she said on a call. They say it feels different, like we actually care again. And my employees? They're relieved. They're working just as hard, but they're not afraid of losing hours if they have a slow sales day. Hearing that was proof that we were on the right track. But we weren't done yet. The real test was still ahead. The first month under the new system was the hardest. Some managers struggled to adapt, employees were skeptical, and customers were still feeling out the changes. But slowly, things started to shift. In stores where managers embraced the new policies, employees moved with a different kind of energy, less tense, more engaged. They weren't constantly glancing at the clock, worried about hitting sales quotas. Instead, they focused on helping customers, and in turn, those customers started to notice. At one location, a longtime shopper told an associate, "It actually feels good to shop here again. I used to avoid coming in because I didn't want to be pressured into signing up for something." Another customer, an older woman, stopped a manager to say, "This is the first time in years I didn't feel rushed at checkout." The real shock, though, came when we looked at the numbers. Despite the initial concerns from Paul and a few others, revenue hadn't plummeted. In fact, in the stores that had fully embraced the changes, sales had actually gone up. Customers were spending more, not because they were being pressured, but because they were comfortable. They trusted the staff. They felt good about being there. It turned out that when employees weren't exhausted or afraid, they did better work. When they weren't being forced to hit impossible quotas, they found genuine opportunities to recommend products instead of pushing them. They built relationships with customers. And that, in the long run, was far more valuable than any short-term sales tactic. Some managers, like Paul, eventually came around. He wasn't thrilled at first, but after seeing his store's performance improve, he pulled me aside during a visit. "I'll admit it," he said, shaking his head. "I was wrong. This actually works." Not every store saw instant success. A few were still struggling. Some managers resisted change, and those locations weren't improving as quickly. But I wasn't expecting perfection overnight. What mattered was that we were moving in the right direction. And Jamie, the employee who had first told me how bad things were, she was now in a leadership training program. She went from feeling invisible to being a leader in a company that finally saw her worth. Looking back, going undercover was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. It forced me to face the uncomfortable truth that I had let my company drift into something I never intended it to be. It had become a machine that valued numbers over people, and in doing so, we had lost what made us special. But the biggest lesson I learned? A business is only as strong as the people who run it. If you burn out your employees, you burn out your company. If you focus on numbers instead of people, you lose both. This experience changed the way I lead. It reminded me that the best decisions aren't always the easiest, and that listening, truly listening, to the people on the front lines is the most valuable thing a leader can do.